My name is Nathan.
No.
What?
It takes a little bit to start. Go ahead and start now.
My name is Nathan Jester, and this is for AP American History. And these are my grandparents, Nancy Goodyear and Carrie Goodyear. And today I will be interviewing them about the JFK assassination, Vietnam, and the space race. So, first question for the JFK assassination. Where did you live at this time?
Well, we were both living in Maine. I was living in a little town called Bar Mills, and Carrie was living across the river from me in a town called Salmon Falls.
All right.
Well, just got to ask the next question.
How did you find out about it?
Okay, I remember it very well. The date was on Friday, the 22nd of November, 1963, and it was in Dallas, Texas. The time there was 12:30, but for us it was about 1:30 in the afternoon. And I was at school in the gym, and I just remember a young girl just running, screaming through the gym doors, saying that the president had been shot. And at that time they weren't sure whether he was alive or not. And then later on, before we were dismissed for the day, they found out that he had indeed died. And I very distinctly remember riding home on the bus and people crying. And the other thing for us that was important was I had just had my birthday on the 19th and turned 14. I was a freshman, and my husband had just had his birthday on the 14th of November and had turned 16. So it was, made that even more special since it was right after our birthdays and right around the Thanksgiving time frame as well.
Yeah, I remember being between classes and hearing about it in the hallway. But other than that, I don't remember too much about the actual day. I can remember the summer previous, we'd been down to Cape Cod at Hyannisport and had seen the Kennedy complex and had seen President Kennedy and his wife and kids drive by in a limousine on that Sunday, I guess on their way to church. So, we had more of attachment than I did any of the other presidents.
So you actually got to see them?
Yes, drive by.
Okay. I didn't know that. So how did this affect you guys?
Well, I don't know. I know my mom was really like Kennedy, and she had a big picture of him in our hallway, and was very sad, as was the nation. And I remember very distinctly when they had the funeral, the famous picture of his little son saluting as he went by, and the nation being touched by it. I'm not sure how it affected our lives individually. There was a lot going on in the country at that time. Like anything else, we were saddened by the death of the president, and of course remembering seeing the vice president being sworn in as president on the jet. I believe he was it took place on the airplane that they were on, and the nation just trying to pull itself together. And I remember the trials for Lee Harvey Oswald, and then of course he was killed by Jack Ruby, and so it's kind of like the equivalent of 9/11 here for you. It was a big thing that happened to the nation.
Yeah, everybody was shocked that it could happen in that day and age. But other than that, I don't remember too much about it.
Yeah, it didn't really affect our individual lives per se.
Okay. Then how did it affect the world around you? What did you notice about other people?
Just that, in a political state, everybody just wondering. I think the biggest thing with Kennedy's assassination was this just a random shooting? But it came out that it could have been a plot to actually kill him, through the government and stuff. So it's always been a secret. I don't know if it's ever come out, the whole story, the whole true story about it. So, and the whole Kennedy family, they had all kinds of stuff going on. And I think a sad thing too is later his son died tragically in a plane crash.
Yeah, but his brother was assassinated too.
Yeah, Robert Kennedy was assassinated, and then Ted Kennedy had his own Chappaquiddick and
When did that
stuff.
happen?
not his son, his brother,
His brother.
Yeah.
Chet Kennedy. It wasn't
I
very-
think that they were going to run the brother for president, and he was assassinated before the
Primaries.
broke out.
So how long was that after JFK?
A year or two.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, of course, and you weren't going to ask us this, but the 4th of April, 68, Martin Luther King was assassinated. So it was, that was what, 5 years later. So between the Kennedy's assassinations and then Martin Luther King, it was a rough time for the country. And you are going to ask about Vietnam, and that was, Kennedy was involved with the Bay of Pigs situation, and that was very tense for the people in Florida, the Cuban crisis, and yeah.
So, all right, moving on now to Vietnam. How old were you guys during the war? During the wartime?
I was nearing graduation from high school, and I was at West Point during the most, and then after I was commissioned in the Army, it ended a couple of years later. But it affected my decision on where I would go to college. I figured I would be drafted out of college, so I decided that I would seek enrollment at West Point. And I was fortunate enough to get there, so I had the 4 years of college guaranteed, but then the probable being assigned to Vietnam after I graduated.
Yeah, I remember when I joined him in Germany, which was his first assignment. A good friend of ours who was a captain at the time said, well, I'm not going back to Vietnam until your husband goes once, because he had already been twice, and it was supposed to be a rotation. But as Carrie said, we were very fortunate that the war was being drawn down by the time we finished, and he went to graduate school, and by then it was over, or our part in it anyway, America.
Yeah. So at West Point, they talked about it all the time, what was happening during the summer months. We would have military training. So we'd have a lot of people that had recently come back from Vietnam and tell us how the tactics and what the fighting was like. They'd take us up on helicopters and explain different things. So, I was fully experiencing it secondhand anyhow, hearing all the stories from there. But I'd go home on vacation at Christmas time, and all my high school friends that had gone to civilian universities were anti-war, whereas most of what I was hearing at West Point was, from the conservative side. We were fighting for freedom and protection against communism. So it was completely different perspectives.
Well, and a lot of those fellow students had been drafted, and a lot of them went too. And we had classmates that died there.
So, yeah, I know a lot of people were kind of against that war and stuff. And did you know anyone, like a friend or a family member that fought in the war?
Yeah, we had, there were these two brothers that we knew well in school. Carrie knew them really better than I did, but the older brother was jumping out of a helicopter, and he hit the ground, and his legs were driven up into his body. And they were under fire, but the chopper went back down and got him, and they took him to a field hospital and basically told him he'd probably never walk again. But miraculously, they were able to pull the legs back through from the body, and somehow he didn't damage any vital internal organs. And so, of course, he was in a very long time of recuperation, and he did walk again. I mean, he proved them wrong. And he was short to begin. It's kind of funny. He was short to begin with. But my cousin's husband fought in Vietnam, and quite a few of the young people that we knew in our villages went. I mean, back in those days, the majority of the young men in our classes, graduating classes, which for Carrie was 1966, and I was 1967, they went. They didn't have a lot of choices. But I remember government class my senior year. We did a whole thing on, should we be in the war, should we not be in the war? And my dad, having been in World War II, he was very much pro, fighting for the country, fighting for freedom, and so I was always on the side of we needed to be there. It did have a purpose. And then, of course, in the years in the military, we met a lot of people that fought. I right now personally play in a band with a number of Vietnam vets and hear their stories. And it wasn't a pretty thing to go through, but everyone that I know who did go and who did fight felt that it was necessary and it meant something.
So what was the news like every day?
Yeah, every 5 o'clock news, 11 o'clock news. They actually did body counts. Every day it would be this many people have lost their lives, this many casualties, this many missing in action. Like I was saying, 11 o'clock news finished up at midnight, and back in those days we had 3 channels and the test screen came on and the TV went off for the night, But it was very much in the news, and I think the saddest part was these young people came home and weren't supported by the country. They, like World War I, World War II, they were heroes, they came back, and this war was so divided and it had more casualties, I believe, too. And it was a different warfare, jungle warfare. They hadn't really, I guess in Japan they had some, but this was much different. And I think that was the sad part of it all. But yeah, it was very much in the news. It was in the papers, and like I said, every single night. And it showed videos. It showed correspondence there, showing the bombing and the strafing and everything else that was going on.
And, I was fortunate in that I graduated in 1970, went through more training. And my first assignment was Germany, with the expectation that it'd be short, 1, maybe 2 years, and then I'd be assigned to Vietnam. But the war ended in 1972, and so I stayed in Germany until 1974.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course you heard about it there. You're in a military community, and they're pro what's going on, and trying to help, and some of them wanted to be there, some people really wanted to fight and be there. They thought it was necessary.
So overall, how did this war affect you guys?
Well, it affected me in that I went into the military and made it a career for 22 years.
Which was a good thing.
Yes,
Found up a good life.
But for society, it started the hippie movement and drugs and free love and all that stuff. So it really changed society a lot of distrust for government started then, any kind of authority.
Yeah, so there was a fair amount of negativism with that war, as opposed to any wars beforehand. And I think it was hard for our parents to understand, because both our fathers fought in the World War II, and as did all of our older relatives, and they just couldn't understand why the people weren't behind it. But the new generation was more about me. I'm important, and what I want's important, and it kind of created a change in people's thinking, not necessarily for the better.
But what you see today is support for the military. In Vietnam, a lot of universities banned ROTC. They had demonstrations outside military bases. They'd throw things at anyone in uniform. Mm-hmm. Whereas now it's, at least if you're serving in the military, they support you. You're kind of a hero for going off to war and protecting freedoms.
I remember in that respect, I went locally to college, and I was walking into our building one morning, and there was a Vietnam protester with a microphone on the stairs of the school, and just going on, and our German biology teacher went up and grabbed the microphone and just started berating him because she had lived through World War I and World War II, and she had seen what Hitler had done to her country and her people, and she just really let him have it with the idea of, no, this is important. Anybody that's being persecuted and held back, we need to be there, we need to help them. And he just kind of got real quiet and walked off. But, you know, I was proud of her for doing that. I mean, but she understood. She'd lived through wars, so.
You got the impression he was more against being drafted and having to go himself than any political stand he had.
Yeah. Yeah, I think many of them didn't even understand. I mean, no one wants to go get shot at, you know, bottom line. No one wants to go and kill anyone, you know, I mean, it's just not nature for man to want to do those things, so. But in those days, you didn't have a choice if you were a certain age and you got drafted, you know.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on to the space race. Where were you guys during this time?
Either at high school or in college.
Okay.
But I can remember hearing the news about Sputnik going up, and then I think Kennedy was president, and then wanting, you know, gearing up the space race that, you know, we're better technology-wise, and therefore we should be first in space. And it geared up NASA, Kennedy Space Center, started trying to put men up in orbit, and then at the end of that, we put the man on the moon.
Oh, I remember that day.
And so we won, and out of it came, you know, the solid state transistor era of technology. A lot of things that were developed by NASA for space use became, you know, big benefits to us commercially.
And who knew all those years later, for 22 years, we lived, what, 20 minutes away from Kennedy Space Center on the Barrier Island.
Yeah. So what was the most exciting part of this for you guys?
Well, the man on the moon.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a biggie.
Yeah, who would have thought we could put it, and then we haven't done it since.
Yeah, they kind of left the moon alone. No, it's just the space station, and I mean, it's been sad sort of living down there now to see the end of the shuttles, you know, and all of that. But they're growing again. There's something new coming in down there.
So what were the highs and lows of the space program during that time?
Well, the shuttle, when it exploded on takeoff, the first one, and then we were living down there when the second one disintegrated
over Texas.
Yeah.
But even before that, they had the one where they still went up in that pod, and they burned on it went on fire, and they burned right there on the launch pad. That happened even way before then. But you know, obviously the tragedies made them study harder and figure out better suits, and you know, all the different things that they needed to do to make it safer and better. And like Carrie was saying, we wouldn't have all this electronic stuff today without all those satellites up there roaming around.
The major investment in the space race, this country could afford it back then.
Yeah, I think it went away from, I think originally it was all about exploration of space to see if there was viable places for man to live if things got bad down here. And I think they went away from that so much as...
the threat of a nuclear holocaust lessened.
So it came up more with the military and getting satellites and communication and being able to see what the other people are doing and all this spy stuff. Which is important.
All right. So overall, how did living in those times change or affect you?
Well, like anything else, everything that you go through in your life affects who you are and what you stand for and the music you love. And I mean, you know, that's another whole story, a side of our life, the whole rock and roll era and the Beatles and, you we were your age, teenagers, going through all of that, and trying to figure out what was important, and
Yeah, it was a simpler time. You
Oh, yeah.
expected to go to work for a company and stay there for your entire career. Now it's you keep hopping from job to job, hoping your company will stay solvent.
yeah, it's not even your choice sometimes. The companies just fold or get bought out, and it was a much more stable time, I think, even with Vietnam. The home front was still much more stable and family oriented too, I think, more so.
Yeah.
All right. So, what lessons should I learn from your experiences?
Well, you can learn a lot of things if you're willing to listen. I think that's the hardest part, young people talking to older people and realizing that they went through things that they don't want to see you, the hard times, they don't want to see you suffer and go through stuff. And it's like, just listen to me. Just realize that we've lived it, we've gone through it, our parents went through it. Values, I think probably for us, we realize the importance of family and the values of life and being good people and honorable, honest people, not trying to get away with things. You learn from the deaths that happen with the wars that life is very short and you can't take anything for granted. Even your education, learning and letting school be an important part of your life, and having goals, setting goals, and knowing that you're not always in control. Things can happen in our government, or that changes our lives, but we have to be able to adapt and go forward and learn from history. Yes, they always say if you don't learn from it, history repeats itself. And so, we sometimes had leaders in the country that saw that and tried to make changes, but the people wouldn't listen for whatever reason. And you didn't even touch on here, and I'm sure others would, about the whole racial thing that went on in this country. And we weren't affected so much up home in New England because it was more in the South, but we certainly heard a lot of things. And, I think we've learned. We've come a far way.
Yeah.
We're excited to have been a part of your experiment here. And, you said 15 minutes, but people could go on talking for forever. I mean, we've got 60 plus years of living and experiences, but we did live through a lot of things that happened large in the world at that time in history.
Grandma's more than anxious to tell you about it.
Yeah.
All right.
But thank you for this opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you. Hopefully that records.